girls, it's Friday, and I had an entire video already recorded on my laptop, but for some reason the audio decided to completely unsynchronize with the visual, and that was just not copacetic to my liking. Anyway, it's 4th week of January, I've missed your faces. I was planning on making a video the 1st week of January, but then my laptop hard drive decided to crash on me. So $400 later, I have my laptop back with a bigger and better hard drive. So that makes me happy. Since you've seen me last, I have read a good 8 books. Eat Right for Your Type, Uglies, Pretties, Shiver, Linger, Double Take, Peeps, and The Last Days. A lot of books. Eat Right for Your Type is, as I said, all about your blood type and what's the best diet for your specific blood type. So, it's pretty good. And that's all it's about. It's a bunch of medical mumbo jumbo. And then Shiver, fantastic book. Maggie, and I'm not even going to try and say her last name because it's some name I cannot pronounce. But fantastic book. Starts off with Grace sitting on her swing as a little girl getting attacked by wolves. So she gets pulled off her swing into the woods and she's just staring up in the sky like near death, and for some reason this one wolf comes up to her and she can't help but stare at his eyes. No matter what, she's looking at his eyes. And she's saved. She doesn't know how, but she's saved. And then throughout the years, she always sees this wolf in the winter. And she doesn't understand why. She never sees him in the summer. She imagines in the summer that he goes off into these golden woods, and she has this image of woods in her head. Doesn't understand where it comes from. But this whole book is based on her love for this wolf. And then at some points, it switches back and forth. Because this wolf with those amazing yellow golden eyes, his name is Sam. He is a werewolf. And he shifts between human and wolf. They don't quite know what causes a shift, but usually cold equals wolf, hot equals human. And then after so long, they stop shifting. But the book goes back and forth between the two, and it's really fascinating. And they fall in love. After like 8 or 9 years of her watching them in the winter, loving the wolves in the woods, and him watching her, like even in the summers, he's worked at a bookstore and just kind of kept an eye on her. And at the end of this book, they come into a relationship. That's kind of where it leaves off. So they're just having a good relationship. And then the next book, Linger, starts up. The relationship's stronger. Linger really builds on the characters. And this one person in Shiver, you think Isabel, you think she's pretty shallow, but throughout Linger, she grows into a better person, and you actually start really liking her. So it's a really good book. And then at the end of Linger, it's like hospital, Grace jumping out a window, what? And you really need to read Forever. But since I was on vacation, I did not have Forever with me. It was a library book. I have it now, and I cannot wait to read it. Next, I moved on to Uglies and Pretties. I really liked those books. I liked how Uglies and Pretties, like that whole series had its own kind of language and just their own terms, and I really like that. I like how it's this whole new world built on like technology, where you can just talk to the buildings, say, I want this, and pop, you have it. And even when you're an ugly or pretty, you still have that technology with the buildings, except the Uglies have a lot of rules. So from 12 to 16, you've got rules. But it's pretty easy to break the rules and get out and cause your little tricks. The specials actually kind of like those tricks, but that's for the next book after Pretties. At the end of Pretties, they tell you why it's easy for Uglies to make their little tricks. I quite like that. But it's really cool. In Uglies, they show you the whole world and how the people are. Tally's the main character, and she meets Shay. And then through Shay, she finds the Smoke and David. Wonderful little relationship there. At the end of Uglies, the specials are coming to try and find them. Tally gives herself up to see if she can help find a cure. And then in Pretties, it's a completely different world. It tells you all about how the Pretties have no rules. They can drink, do whatever they want. They're basically shallow and just so pretty. If they want anything, they get it. If they want to have surgery to make themselves pretty or have moving tattoos, they get it. Or gems in their eyes, like anything like that. They get what they want. They can have as much surgery as they want. And it goes to show really a good reflection of how our society is, how our society really looks down on anything different. And the reason the Pretties were created was to make a war-free society. Just to have people all look similar, get along, play nice, and just stop war. At the end of that book, there's a lot of characters that brought in. Shay totally changes because she's turned into a Pretty. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to keep moving on. Either way, it's a fantastic book. Double Take was just a murder mystery. I read a lot of murder mysteries, and I'd say Double Take was pretty good, but it kind of did drag on a lot. And I'm used to Mary Higgins Clark. She's one of my favorite authors. A Cry in the Night was the first book of hers I've ever read, and I found it thrown on a bookshelf here somewhere when I was young. And that's what really got me into reading, because I'd tear through one of those books in a couple days. And that made you feel really good when you're like 10 years old and you can read a novel pretty quick. Anyway, Double Take's about a girl named Ariel, and she happens to be a twin that was separated at birth, and her twin lives in South Carolina, and she lives in LA. They were separated at birth, so raised completely different, but Ariel has an accident that makes her forget her entire past, and she loses a ton of weight, and in the end she ends up looking exactly like Jane. And Jane happens to die, and she doesn't even know anything about her twin sister. She never even knew she had one until a few months ago. And then she went back to South Carolina to see her grandfather because he was sick, so she went over to see him. And it's just going back and forth between South Carolina and LA. And her grandfather's housekeeper really doesn't like her too much because she looks just like Jane. She does things that Jane did, like putting certain sauces on food. So it's really interesting. And there's a lot of twists in there that I didn't really expect. And she has a love interest that you can kind of guess, but it was good, but as I said, drawn out. And then when I got back from my vacation, I read Peeps and The Last Days. They were really good books. They're both by Scott Westerfeld, and they're about vampires, essentially. And the way he explains vampirism is a parasite. And it gets passed on through bodily fluids and rats. And this main character, Cal Thompson, gets infected when he's at some bar. And all he can remember is a Bahama Llama Ding Dong. And it's like, okay. So his goal for the entire book is to find all of his ex-girlfriends so he can capture them and they can be cured. Because he gets infected, but he doesn't become crazy. So he's a natural carrier. And then his whole goal is to find Morgan. She's the girl that infects him. So he's just searching throughout the whole book, just trying to understand what's going on. And it's not until the end that he finds out who Morgan is, and he's pretty pissed off because of the fact that she was really easy to find, but the whole night watch in the mayor's office was keeping it more of a secret because she has a pretty old last name. Like, this takes place in New York, and one of the certain last names have been around for centuries, and Morgan's last name happens to be one of them. But either way, in the end, he figures out what's going on, and he eventually does team up with Morgan, and not without bringing along a girl named Lace. And they figure out that the infection is 2 different strains. The new one gets passed on by the rats. The old one is much older, was hiding underground, but because of an enemy underground, it's becoming awake, rising up. It was pushing the old strain up with the rats, and therefore cats were getting infected. And the cats were what really passed it between humans and cats. Because, yeah, who doesn't have a cat? And when they do, the cats usually sleep on their chests. Like cuddly close, and it's an old myth where cats steal your breath away. And that's where the whole passing of the parasite comes in. It's pretty interesting. And then the second book comes in, The Last Days, and I don't like it as much as I like the first one. I really don't. But that's just because you don't get to hear about Cal and Lacey and what's going on until you're, what, 2/3 of the way in? But the point of this is, the first 2/3 of the book, we're talking to new characters. There is Alana Ray, which is an amazing drummer, and she drums on paint buckets. There is Zaylor and Moz, short for mosquito. They're the first two guitarists. They're in a band sort of thing. And Moz ends up meeting Pearl when the whole city's coming into like a post-apocalyptic thing where the parasite's spreading. People are going crazy, throwing shit out the window like crazy. And Moz and Pearl meet up when this woman's throwing out a really expensive old guitar. It's an old Strat, and it's got gold, whatever. And yeah, they meet because they catch the guitar together. And that's how the whole story takes off. And the last character is Minerva. She's the singer of the band. Then they get together and start recording and get signed. What they don't realize is Minerva's crazy songs happen to actually call the beast up from underneath. So as they're playing their first gig, this big old worm comes up, and what they call the angels is what Cal and Lace have become. Just jump down and attack the worm. So that's pretty cool. And essentially the angels take away all the crazy people. So right then and there they took the 5 people away. They realized that 2 people were at least affected because Moz just started trashing the guitar that he fell in love with. But that's what happens. When you get sick, you destroy what you're in love with. And Minerva happened to infect Moz. But yeah, Moz destroys the guitar. So the angels see that he's getting to the stage where he's about to go crazy. So they take him, her, and the other 3 away. And since the other 3 and Minerva are alright, they kind of have a little less security around them. But it's really interesting because once Moz is stable enough to hear his own name, see his own face, they get the whole band back together and they'll tour around the entire country, entire world, just calling these worms up from underneath so that they can destroy them. And it's really fascinating, but I still don't like the fact you don't hear about Cal and Lace or anything until 2/3 of the way in. Because yeah, it builds up the whole story of how the world looks now and what happened after with the garbage and everything piling up, cats everywhere, rats everywhere. But I just would have been more interested in hearing more about Cal and Lace. It just kind of leaves it hanging. So you're just kind of like, oh, okay, so they went off and joined the angels. So what's going to happen to them? And then you spend this whole part of the book reading about new people, and you're thinking in the back of your head, like, where did they go? Then out of nowhere, there they are. So I just don't like that whole not knowing. But I do like how each chapter in the book, and the same with the first one, it flips between who's telling the story. So one chapter will be from Pearl's point of view, one from Moz's, one from Minerva's. And that's the way it goes. Both books. It talks about Cal and Lace in the first book, and then this one talks about everyone else. So I like that, so you get to see the point of view from everybody. So that's one of my favorite things about the books. And that's the same thing with The Shiver and Linger and Forever. It flips between people's points of view. And I'm not used to books doing that. I'm used to books being told from one point of view. So I actually quite like hearing the other person's side. It builds more to the character. But anyway, I have talked way too long. I hope you girls have a fabulous weekend. And I'm really excited because I heard that all 3 of us are going to be at VidCon. So yay! I'm really happy I get to meet both of you. Anyway, have a fabulous weekend. Maybe see you Monday.